just to ensure I am the primal target.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this inaugural digital-only debate here at the Cambridge Union. This is the first time in our 205-year history that we've done anything like this. So we thought this would be a cool thing to try when we're all in lockdown. The motion before the House this evening is this House backs global government's lockdowns. So something that's affecting all of us right now. If you're a member of the union, you can vote what you think before at cus.org/elections. So just tell us what you think beforehand, and then after the debate, we're going to go back and do the same thing to see who changed their minds. In terms of the ground rules for this, each speaker will have 8 minutes to speak on whatever they want to talk about. We'll alternate as usual, proposition, opposition. If you're familiar with our kind of in-person events, we're not going to be doing the points of information floor speeches, so sorry about that. But we're all very excited about that. I'm Adam Davies, the union's president this term. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce the first speaker tonight, Dr. Carol Sikora. Dr. Carol Sikora is an oncologist and Dean of Medicine at the University of Buckingham. And he's a graduate of Corpus Christi, Cambridge. So a Cambridge guy. Dr. Sikora?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Adam. We live in unprecedented times. Governments have tough choices. When the virus first appeared in Wuhan, China, there was no WHO guidance to governments. They just had to get their experts together and make up their own minds. Let's use UK as an example. Here, there was dramatic news footage in the middle of March of Italy, the chaos in Italy, the severe problems in the hospitals, which were swamped by people needing intensive care. Then Imperial College came up with a model that really made the ministers press the panic button. 500,000 people could die in this pandemic in Britain. That was unacceptable. The ministers decided, let's go for lockdown, a very British lockdown, a very gentle lockdown, not like in police states where they really made it very tough. Very powerful psychops came into play. The familiar slogan, stay home, protect the NHS, save lives, is familiar now to all of us. And that was the creation of the Behavioural Insights team in number 10 Downing Street. Remarkable psychology behind that. I think the team were even very surprised how well we behaved. Now, what's the scientific evidence for lockdown, and why I think I would support totally our government's approach and many of the other governments around the world? The first thing you want to do in a pandemic is reduce the magic number R0, R0, which is the number of people that will be transmitted to with the virus from a single person. When we started, the R0 was 2.6. It dropped after 2 weeks of distancing all the lockdown measures to less than 1, which is good. That means the virus can't spread. This protects the surge in healthcare demand. It protected the NHS from getting swamped during the surge at Easter. Critical care would have been overwhelmed, as in Italy, if we hadn't done something. It's failed to allow other health needs to be met. So my specialism, cancer, the cancer patients have disappeared in April. They're just not there. They, of course, are there. They're just not being diagnosed because there's no system for them to go through, no pathway. The problem we've got now is how to get out of this mess. It's easy to get in, you press a button in the cabinet. How do we get out? And that's where the controversy starts. Hopefully, we'll get out of it in the next 2 weeks, or we'll begin to get out of it. And there's controversy about how many people are infected. Imperial groups say probably less than 10%. Oxford groups say maybe up to 70% of people are actually infected. Makes a lot of difference when it comes to the magic words herd immunity. If it's 70%, we're there, we can just let it go. If it's only 10%, we've got a lot of immunity to convey to people before we can come out of it. So on one hand, you've got a run hot strategy where you just let it go and see what happens, as long as you've got capacity to deal with ill people in the health service. The other strategy is to do it very slowly. And what we're seeing with other countries, they're natural laboratories for getting out of here. Austria went free last week, little shops opened, schools are opening next week, nurseries and so on. And that's the pattern we're seeing. Sweden, no lockdown. The incidence is higher, but the deaths are lower than Britain. Here, as I said, it's a very British way of doing it. We've done it by persuasion rather than by force. In some countries, they're even involving bribery. You can get a reward if you report on your neighbor if they leave their house. So we've got to work out a way to get out. And that is the most difficult thing facing the decision makers in Parliament at this very moment. They've got to start coming out in early May. They said 3 weeks. I suspect it'll be earlier. But to me, the lockdown was an essential part of preventing the whole health system being overwhelmed. It made scientific sense. It also makes scientific sense to get us out as quickly as possible. I would prefer a hot release mechanism where we just really try and go for it over a 4-week period, back to full service, restaurants, bars, everything opening by the end of May and getting back to normal life. I think the mental health issues are profound. And if we don't do something soon, the economy, of course, £2.6 billion a day down the pan because of this lockdown. We've got to somehow get out of it. And also, we'll have more deaths from my specialty, cancer, if we let it run, than we will from COVID. So important to get us out of here. But as I say, I strongly support the lockdown. You're too young to remember, Adam. There was a great song in 1977 called Hotel California. You can check out any time you like, but you can never leave. That's the predicament facing the governments all over the world now. How do they get out of this mess? Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for that speech, Dr. Sikora. And he was speaking for Proposition, obviously. On the other side, we have Dr. Mushfiq Mubarak, who's a development economist and a professor at Yale. The floor is yours.
Thanks very much for inviting me. Unlike Professor Sikora, I will take the word global in the debate motion very seriously, which is that this is not just about the UK, the whole world is involved, and in particular, many low-income and middle-income countries are involved, and we should be thinking about policies that are well suited to the capacities in each country. And at the outset, I should say, look, I'm here to not just debate, but also to discuss and learn. And we are all flying blind. We're in real time trying to devise policies to save people's lives. And we have to acknowledge the various uncertainties that we have. Okay? Okay, so my position is that, in fact, in rich countries like the United States and the United Kingdom, maybe we should be pursuing social distancing and perhaps stronger forms of social distancing, but that one-size-fits-all policy approach is not appropriate to think about in various different countries. Right? So Dr. Sikora already mentioned the Imperial College model. Right? It has been very influential, of course, for UK policy and even US policy. So what I did was just run the numbers from developing countries inside that exact same model. Okay, and the answer you get is very different. You should not be pursuing lockdowns with the same level of stringency and urgency that you would in high-income countries. And let me explain the 3 reasons why the numbers you get are different. So one is that the age distribution of the population is very different. As we already know, this disease is a lot more fatal for elderly people. In high-income countries, there are 18% of the population that are elderly. 3% of the population that are elderly, and in low-income countries, I had it right the first time. High-income countries, 18% are elderly, and in low-income countries, it's only 3%. It's a massive difference in the age distribution, right? There are many fewer people to save in poor countries by imposing lockdowns. And on the other hand, you have to compare that against the cost of imposing a lockdown, right? So what are those costs? In poor countries, if there's a lockdown in the UK, all of you can sit at home as you are doing right now and do your job, right? As I'm doing right now, right? Now think about a day wage laborer in Bangladesh, where whatever he earns or she earns in that given day, in that given week, determines what is it that the family will be eating that week, right? Can we impose the same kind of lockdown on that population? Right? We should be thinking about the costs and benefits differently. Right? And the second reason is that third reason is that the health system capacities are, of course, very different. So why are we doing lockdowns? Why are we doing social distancing? Remember the curve, the flattening the curve that we've all heard about over and over, right? Why do we flatten the curve? Because we don't want the number of ill and dead or number who show up at hospitals to overwhelm the health system capacity, right? The curve needs to remain below the capacity. Now think about a rural area of a developing country, right? The capacity is already so low that by delaying illness, we're not actually going to make any difference. It doesn't matter if you get ill early or late, right? Either way, you won't have access to the healthcare system. Okay. Now, I'm sure everybody in the opposition will talk about comorbidities, right? So in poor countries, it is definitely an issue, and here's the uncertainty. It's definitely an issue that comorbidities like pollution levels are higher. In my other life, I do research on the effects of indoor air pollution on people, and I am very, very worried about the effects of COVID on populations that are already immunocompromised in some way, like whether it's due to pollution or because of malnutrition or other threats that they face, right? But on the other hand, as Nicholas Kristof in today's New York Times column pointed out, obesity rates in the United States are about 70%. So the truth is we actually don't know. Nobody knows whether the comorbidities will lead us to thinking about a more stringent policy in poor countries versus a less stringent policy, right? Nobody knows. I would love to get the numbers if somebody has them and we can put it into the Imperial College model. I would love to do it, but without numbers, it's very difficult for us to make decisions on that basis. Okay. And then the day wage labor story I was telling, this is no longer hypothetical. I am working with the government of Bangladesh to devise our COVID response strategy. I'm also working in Nepal, and we already have the numbers come back from Nepal, right? So there's in developing countries, as many of you will know, that there are hunger seasons, there are pre-harvest lean seasons, right? So we've been tracking a population about how much they get to work, and of course it drops during the lean seasons relative to an ordinary time of the year. And right now, even though this is their harvest season, the amount of work available has dropped by 50%, even above and beyond the drop that you experience in the hunger season. Okay, that is dangerous. And then other reasons for the lockdown, to think about it differently for different countries, right? Your implementation capacity is going to be very different, right? Dr. Sikora talked a lot about how we are implementing in the UK. Now, in another life, I do research on implementation and how do people respond. Now, if you set up systems that are not sensible, that are too stringent, that are too difficult for people to follow, right? They don't follow it. Your police even does not, they don't implement for you, right? And so we have to think carefully about what is it that it's feasible for poor countries to do, have sensible policies, and only then it will get implemented. And regardless of whether we're pro or against lockdowns, it is absolutely true that in all countries, and especially in low-income countries, we need to target social transfers and get money in the hands, social benefits in the hands of people, just so they can survive this. Because if they're hungry, they're not going to follow your guidelines even if you impose those guidelines, right? And there's no way we can enforce it in remote rural areas. And in many countries, we don't have that infrastructure. Like, right, how do we, I'm struggling with this problem right now. How do I go about finding out who is deserving of receiving transfers among the 160 million people in Bangladesh, right? We don't have an infrastructure. It's not that less than 2% of people submit tax returns, okay? And so I don't know who to target. In the United States, we're getting our transfers based on our tax returns for the previous year, right? And so I'm instead advocating, not complete lockdowns, but social distancing strategies that are sensible and that are adapted to the local realities, right? So for example, like maybe we want to target strategies in the following way. We want to allow people who are desperate for economic livelihood, they should be allowed to go out and work, right? And then we protect the vulnerable, right? So in that way, of course, we need, but people pass diseases to each other, I understand that, right? But we need families to get involved. The government and institutions, that are centralized and just tell people what to do, right? It's not the only way to do things, right? We might need to just decentralize some of that capacity and some of that responsibility to each individual family to figure out how will they protect the vulnerable, how will they separate the elderly? Because in poor countries, there's a lot of cohabitation, right? But families can solve that problem much better than the government can. We need to engage in social influencing strategies rather than just imposing lockdowns, right? Maybe get the imams at mosques in Pakistan, Indonesia, Nigeria involved to make sure that there are no religious gatherings, there's no social gatherings, right? It's not about full-fledged lockdowns across all aspects of life and economic livelihood, right? You can impose lockdowns against religious gatherings at mosques where the virus is likely to pass from one person to another. Instead, maybe we should be tailoring our strategies to exactly why is it that people are having to go outside. Okay. And finally, I just want to repeat to say that there are, we are all learning as we go along, right? And I'm hoping to learn from the other speakers today.
I know much less than you, and I'm also hoping to learn. So our next speaker is from the proposition. It's Dr. Crystal Donnelly. She is a professor of statistical epidemiology at Imperial. The floor is yours. You're muted.
Unmute. Okay.
Great.
According to the Worldometer website at lunchtime today, over 186,000 deaths have already been attributed to the virus that causes COVID-19. This is against a background of not just 2.6 million confirmed COVID-19 cases, but also the very large number of unconfirmed cases. This is from a virus that only emerged late last year in Hubei province, China. The potential of this virus to spread very quickly from person to person has been seen in many countries, first in China, elsewhere in Asia, and now in countries around the world. For example, San Marino is a tiny country completely surrounded by north-central Italy. Italy itself has been severely affected by COVID-19, with over 25,000 deaths so far. However, the impact is particularly striking in San Marino. There have been 40 COVID-19 deaths recorded there so far, but this is out of a population of almost 34,000 people. So that is more than one death per 1,000 people, not one death per 1,000 infections, but one death per 1,000 people. And this is not, of course, as high a death rate as was caused by the 1918 pandemic of H1N1 influenza, but it is still quite a shock. We do not yet have any drugs to effectively treat this disease, and we do not yet have a vaccine to prevent infection. Thus, we have limited options for the time being. Transmission of this virus is through droplets that are breathed out by someone who is infected. This can happen even if the person is asymptomatic at the time. Those droplets can be breathed in by someone else who can then become infected. Alternatively, the droplets might be picked up on someone else's hands off a door handle, for example, and then rubbed into their eyes. How can we limit transmission when faced with such a challenge? Diseases have been eliminated before without a vaccine. SARS is a prime example. There was no vaccine and there were no drugs to cure infections, and yet the disease was eliminated. This happened through huge efforts put into identifying cases. This was made easier because SARS infections resulted in severe clinical disease in those infected. Thus, the S in SARS stands for severe, in severe acute respiratory syndrome. It was controlled by isolating those identified cases as soon as possible, as well as identifying their contacts and limiting their potential to spread to others until they were found to be uninfected. Finally, efforts were made to avoid transmission within healthcare settings after it was recognized how easily the SARS virus could transmit. Why didn't such efforts work for COVID-19? Did people forget? No, they didn't. The challenge was much greater, and so more was required. The effectiveness of a policy of isolating cases and then tracing and isolating their contacts depends on its coverage. What proportion of cases and contacts were isolated and how soon? The lower the proportion of cases and contacts isolated early, the more onward transmission gets through. The efforts required to successfully undertake contact tracing scales, of course, with the numbers involved, but fundamentally, there's a bigger problem. A substantial portion of COVID-19 transmission happens before symptoms start, a so-called pre-symptomatic stage, and even worse from the point of view of control, some people transmit but never have symptoms. This is asymptomatic transmission. Case isolation and contact tracing, as undertaken in China, were together insufficient to stop sustained community transmission of COVID-19. The transmissibility of a virus is measured by its basic reproduction number, R0. The higher R0, the more people on average each infectious person infects. Beyond case isolation and contact tracing, the reproduction number can be lowered either by non-specific behavior change or by explicit interventions. If changes were sustained, then substantial reductions in the infection attack rate, that's the proportion of people who are eventually infected, could be achieved. During any small period of time, the relative risk for an individual to be infected is largely determined by the number of social contact that individual makes. However, over the course of an epidemic, the absolute risk of infection for an individual is determined not only by their own contact behavior, but also by the contacts of their contacts within a transmission group, and more widely by the average behavior of a population. Government-led, highly stringent social distancing in China greatly reduced social contacts, thereby reducing the reproduction number in Wuhan from 2 or 3 to well below 1. The epidemiological success of the Chinese COVID-19 lockdown policy does not immediately imply that other countries should react similarly. However, it did establish an important precedent for the efficacy of the most stringent non-pharmaceutical interventions, or NPIs, and therefore justified consideration of containment as an explicit policy objective in other countries planning their responses. As in China, case isolation and contact tracing in the UK did not prevent sustained community transmission of COVID-19. Thus, we needed large-scale social distancing, the lockdown, to give scientists and policymakers further time to better understand the challenges posed by COVID-19 and to determine which elements of normal life could be reinstated or adapted to keep moving forward with the things we need to do, and indeed with some of the things we just want to do, while keeping transmission risks relatively low. It would be great if we knew exactly who would be mildly affected and who would struggle with COVID-19. If we did, then those who wouldn't be harmed could face infection while we protected those for whom COVID-19 would pose a serious threat. We know some key risk factors: age, some comorbidities, and it appears ethnic group. But this knowledge is not enough to say with confidence who is definitely not at risk of hospitalization and even death if infected. Thus, we have to socially distance the general population to protect the vulnerable and to protect our NHS locally for everyone who needs it. I can't imagine anyone who's listening to me isn't looking forward to going out, going to a restaurant, going to school or work in the usual way. I certainly am. But I'll wait knowing that by doing so, I'm helping protect my family, my friends, and my community more generally. When we come out the other side of lockdown, the process needs to be first carefully risk assessed and then rigorously monitored to ensure that transmission doesn't pick back up. To quote Stephen Fry, "The future remains uncertain, but it's just a day away. The world will be determined by the path we take today." Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. That was a wonderful speech. And that quote is actually, among other things, from the Cambridge Union ad video that Stephen Fry did, which is great. I recommend you watch it. The next speaker will be from the opposition. It's Dr. Leonid Edelman. He is chair of the Division of Anesthesia and Internal Medicine at Tel Aviv University and former president of the World Medical Association. He'll be speaking against the motion. Doctor?
Thank you, Adam. Good evening. I'm glad to participate in this debate. The most effective way to stop epidemics is to detach people from the source of a disease. Lockdowns can be very efficient in communicable diseases. Recently published evaluation by Aurelio Tobias of the lockdowns in Italy and Spain, after 1 month's follow-up, has shown that only the second lockdown, implementing more restrictive measures for mobility, changed the trend slopes in daily incident cases and intensive care unit admissions. Definitely, the life of every person is priceless. However, we live in a world of alternatives. In this world, cost-benefit ratio of the global lockdowns should be evaluated. Every day we make decisions based on our understanding of available possibilities. There are several kinds of costs that we should be ready to pay for lockdowns. In this brief comment, I would like to address shortly expected economic, social, and psychological consequences of lockdown, and then to suggest an alternative to global government lockdowns. Economic consequences are obvious. For example, according to French Economic Observatory, 8 weeks of confinement to stop the spread of coronavirus in France will cost the country some 120 billion euros in lost revenues. Unfortunately, every economic crisis leads to austerity in healthcare, and people pay a high health price due to deprivation of high standard medical care or simply waiting too long for medical treatment. Very frequently, governments choose to save on healthcare first, particularly in the public sector. Likewise, pandemics cause social changes. The current lockdowns and panic have the potential to influence the way we communicate, the role of a person in society, and even the future of our democracy. As a practicing physician, I am very worried that we will see adverse psychological and physical results of the current situation, particularly in the elderly and very young populations. Cognitive and physical conditions of elderly persons in prolonged isolation and disengagement from their routine social and physical activity will probably cause a deterioration in their condition, which may be irreversible in most cases. Young children are stressed in this situation. They learn to see threat in every stranger and tend to self-isolate and develop screen addiction. Words matter. Social distancing is unnatural for human beings. However, physical separation is helpful and important to control the kind of epidemics like COVID-19. One of the problems of the current pandemic is a lack of transparency. Governments should share the data, scientific evidence, and models they use to make decisions related to COVID-19. In many countries, mathematical models of the dynamics of the COVID-19 epidemic have turned out to be unrealistic. According to the European Monitoring of Excess Mortality, MOMO, the excess mortality in a few European countries till the middle of April did not exceed the level of epidemics a couple of years ago. Regarding models, it's worth mentioning that some of them demonstrated a larger effect on the reduction of new cases, transmissions, and deaths when quarantine was combined with other prevention and control measures, including school closures, travel restrictions, and social distancing, or as I call it, physical separation. In my opinion, the approach to the COVID-19 epidemic should be based on multiple testing. I would say test, along with isolation of infected individuals and his or her close contacts and early cordon sanitaire around outbreak areas. Real cordon sanitaire means prevention of any person from leaving the area. Imagine if there had been this kind of regional lockdown in Hubei province on the 31st of December 2019, when China WHO office reported a cluster of cases of pneumonia of unknown origin. Just to mention that the first confirmed patient we know out of China was found in Thailand on January 13th. Repeated testing of the population within the lockdown area can help to shrink the area gradually. I oppose an escalating lockdown of the entire country. I also oppose spreading panic by forecasting hundreds of thousands of victims. Widespread testing, close contact tracing, and physical separation, as were done in Hong Kong, Taiwan, and South Korea, may allow delaying and flattening of the epidemic curve. In addition, I firmly believe that a lockdown of affected areas only, as opposed to a global lockdown, would be more cost efficient. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that speech, Dr. Edelman. The next speaker will be from the proposition. It's Dr. John Edmonds. John Edmonds is a professor at the Department of Infectious Diseases and Epidemiology at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Dr. Edmonds?
יכול להיות שיהיו עוד שאלות, אבל כעיקרון אני סיימתי.
Am I ready to go? Okay, so COVID-19 represents the gravest threat for the health of our nations for 100 years. An unmitigated epidemic of COVID-19 would be a disaster. In the UK, around 50% of the population would become ill within a matter of months, a few chaotic months, and about 5 to 10% of them would require hospitalization. That's millions of hospitalizations, people requiring hospitalization just in a few months. And measured in terms of deaths, the numbers are truly shocking. An unmitigated epidemic just here in the UK would result in somewhere between 350 and 450,000 deaths just due to COVID-19. That's not counting all the other deaths that may occur and already are occurring from other causes due to the overwhelming of our health service and other knock-on effects, many of which will play out, no doubt, over the coming years. So the size of this epidemic, the scale of it, is unprecedented for 100 years. And to put that in perspective, 450,000 deaths, just to put that in some perspective, every year influenza causes somewhere between about 4,000 and 8,000 deaths in the UK. And it's a very serious infection and can really bring the health service, to a standstill almost in the middle of the winter. This epidemic would cause about 50 to 100 times more deaths than a typical influenza epidemic. In addition, another way of putting it into context, deaths in the Second World War in the UK amounted to about 410,000 people died in the Second World War over the period of 6 years. This epidemic will cause about the same number of deaths in the period of a few short months, unless we do something about it. And although lockdowns are not very nice for people, they do work. Experience from other countries have shown that. Experience from China and Italy has shown that that lockdowns are effective at reducing the spread of this infection. In the UK, the reproduction number, the average number of secondary cases each case generates, dropped from about 2.5 to 3 before interventions were put in place to about 0.6 almost immediately. And this is now being seen, and you can see this now having an effect on the epidemiological data, and that you can see that cases have started to come down, hospitalizations have started to come down, and deaths will have plateaued and will gradually come down. It will take longer for those to come down, but they are on the right track. Other methods of trying to control this epidemic failed, frankly. So here we tried contact tracing and travel restrictions and so on, and they didn't work back in February and March of this year. They were not working. And models that were done in late February and March showed that even other rather stringent social distance measures still would not be sufficient to turn the epidemic around. All the models were suggesting that the only real method in order to stop this epidemic would be something really quite radical, something along the lines of a lockdown. So, and shortly before the lockdown, the other critical thing here in the UK was that models were projecting that the intensive care units in the UK, and particularly in London, would be overwhelmed within 2 to 3 weeks. So by the end of March, London's intensive care facilities would be completely overwhelmed. and the rest of the country would follow shortly afterwards. And so radical measures were needed in order to stop that disaster from happening. Those measures had to be put in place and had to be put in place rapidly. And so they were. Not just to stop the epidemic, but also to buy more time to expand our health capacity, which is what we're doing at the moment. So there's no question in my mind that the lockdown has dramatic consequences for people's lives, their well-being, their health, their mental health, as well as huge consequences for the economy. However, it was a necessary evil in order to avoid even worse consequences for the country as a whole. And I'd just like to finish with agreeing with Dr. Mubarak from earlier on. I think it is not the only solution to this epidemic, and it will be necessary to tailor solutions to different countries. He was right to say in lower middle income countries a lockdown may do more damage than good. And there may well be other strategies that are more effective and better tailored to those situations. Perhaps trying to shield the at-risk population far better than we have certainly been able to do it here in the UK. But that might be a more appropriate way to reduce the deaths that will happen from this disease. So I'll finish with that thought. It's not necessary that you implement a lockdown in every country, but certainly here in the UK, where we have sufficient health resources in order to, and we have sufficient resources in order to implement it, I think it was an imperative, and we needed to do it, and thank heaven that we did.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that speech, Dr. Edmonds. So we're going back to the opposition this time. Mr. Peter Hitchens, who is a journalist who writes for the Mail on Sunday. We're speaking against the motion. Mr. Hitchens?
Good evening, Mr. President. And first of all, my thanks to you and to the Cambridge Union by holding this debate at all. It's been quite striking that in this country, there has actually been no debate on the rightness or wrongness of the government policy, either in Parliament, largely in the media, particularly on the BBC, or in the courts. And the Cambridge Union, I think, has earned a place of honour by holding the first such debate. And I think we should be very grateful to you for doing so. My fundamental position must start with this: an acceptance by all of us taking part in this debate that we all have good motives, that none of us seeks to harm anybody, that all of us hope to reduce the number of deaths and the number of losses and the amount of pain in society, that none of us has any other motive than good ones. And I say this because during the past few weeks, I have frequently myself been accused of having motives which are either mercenary or cynical by people who have defended this lockdown. And may I now say one thing about the word lockdown? It is a hideous and ugly word. It is a word developed in the United States prison system, referring to the shutdown, the confinement in their cells of prisoners as a punishment for riot. We are not in a prison. We are citizens of a free society. And in that free society, we are entitled, it seems to me, to a great deal of consideration from our government, which we are not getting. I am told repeatedly that the measures which have been taken are based on the principle of better safe than sorry. Are we in fact safe as a result of what's been going on, or are we in fact less safe than we otherwise were? The economy of this country has been dealt the most tremendous blow over the past few weeks. It is suffering at a rate of £2.4 billion sterling lost each day. Already, all the money saved by the long and painful austerity program of the Cameron-Osborne government has been squandered. We are losing each month this goes on something like 3% of gross domestic product. People must understand what will happen to a society which has suffered on that basis. First of all, one of the main things which will happen is that health will decline. Professor Sitrit Bhakti, one of the many experts on this subject who's been ignored by both the British government and many other governments, warned from the beginning of what he called the horrifying impact on the world economy of these measures, which he said threatens the existence of countless people, operations cancelled, practices empty, hospital personnel dwindling. All this, he said, will impact profoundly on our whole society. I can only say that these measures are leading to self-destruction and collective suicide because of nothing but a spook. Now, these words were spoken many weeks ago. They were spoken before it became clear that an awful lot of the statistics which were being put before us were highly dubious. We were being given figures, first of all, the projected deaths, which again, Professor John Ioannidis of Stanford University has very systematically challenged, and which in practice have so far not turned out to be borne out. And for instance, one must take the example of Sweden because it is so important in Europe as standing out from those countries which have imposed shutdowns on their economies and restrictions on the liberties of their citizens. Now, in Sweden, if one takes the projections of Imperial College, that if there was a partial restraint on the population, I believe the ultimate death total taken in proportion to what they were predicting for the United Kingdom would be something in the region of 39,800. The last time I looked at the Swedish death totals for coronavirus, and I haven't seen this evening's figure, they were approaching 2,000. So very, very far from that. I think that we therefore have to express considerable doubt about what we've been told. We need to express considerable doubt about being told how unprecedented this is. In many years, particularly in the winter crises of the British National Health Service, the hospitals are overwhelmed by very large numbers of influenza cases. I think in one recent year, something approaching 18,000 people died. The arrangement in time is different, but the thing in proportion is not hugely greater. We're being told that it's worse than it is as a threat to us, and at the same time minimizing the enormous dangers to our liberty and to our economy, which, as I say, grow week by week. We've seen in this country the terrible bullying behavior of the police towards the population, their development into something much more like a state militia than the police. In other countries, particularly in Hungary, we've seen the use of the threat of this disease by Viktor Orban to take on powers which verge on the dictatorial. We have seen in economic terms the destruction day by day by day of jobs, the lowering of wages, the crashing of small businesses, which their owners have taken many, many years of painful work to build up. These things have to be taken in proportion to what has been done. And we have to ask ourselves, was what we did a wise and proportionate response? Now, I believe it was not. And I believe also that not only was it not, but that at the beginning, when the decisions were being taken, the leaders of this country did not take any serious effort to discuss it, nor was any proper effort made by the organs of civil society, which are supposed to stand up and provide brakes to foolish action, to do anything to prevent it. We now have a position where it has happened, and it will be, as Karol Sikora rightly said, extremely difficult to get out of, because one of the things about a policy of this extremity is that there is no obvious exit from it. And it is going to be extremely difficult for the government, having actually engaged the enthusiasm and sympathy of the British people in a policy of this strength, to persuade them to stand back from it for the sake of the economy of the country, which they're going to have to do. At the end of it, it seems to me, to avoid a repetition of this, the very least we need to do is to avoid the claims which will be made after this is over, that we were saved from some great tragedy by this action. I do not think that there is sufficient evidence of this. In fact, I think there's a great deal of evidence suggesting it's not so. And for instance, in this country, it's increasingly becoming clear that the number of actual deaths peaked on April the 8th. Now, this would not coincide with any effect of the so-called lockdown. It simply does not do so, and therefore cannot be advanced as having been an effect of it. We're in a position of a man who's been told by some druid that he wishes to sacrifice his cow to avoid a flood. The druid sacrifices the cow, the flood doesn't happen. The druid says, I sacrificed your cow, there's been no flood. Thank me for sacrificing your cow. I do not think that we should really accept this argument without question. I think when this is over, and I sincerely hope, as we all hope, that it will be over soon before it does any more damage, what we have to do above all is to ensure that it is properly understood, properly examined, and that this claim that the destruction of our personal liberty and the huge damage to our economy has saved us from a terrible scourge of disease needs at the very least to be treated with extreme skepticism. Thank you very much.
Thank you as well, Mr. Hitchens. Great to have you speaking here. Our next speaker is from the proposition. It's Dr. Paul Hunter, who's professor in medicine at the University of East Anglia. Dr. Hunter.
And thank you very much for inviting me. Adam, do you know, it's really difficult being an epidemiologist in debates like this, because as an epidemiologist, we are taught to see all aspects of the evidence and synthesize it. And certainly we've heard some very good points made by both sides in the debate so far. It is, I would suggest, that it is still probably one of the most unprecedented global pandemics that I've certainly experienced in my professional life. And unprecedented in part because actually this is not a disease of them. If you think about it, most of the things that we've seen in recent years, Ebola, Zika, cholera, dengue fever, they're things that happen to other people. When you look at how the global epidemiology of COVID-19 has been going on, it's basically Europe and the United States that are really the focus for this epidemic. Yes, Wuhan, one or two other areas. So this is something that's happening to us in a way that many other epidemics haven't in recent past. Now, there are two questions here. The first is it working? Is the lockdown situation working to reduce disease? Certainly, I think the balance of evidence is very clear on this, that lockdowns across Europe are associated with fairly steep declines, both in case numbers and in deaths. And although I think we have to be cautious about deaths reports in the UK, because they tend to be associated with the hospital deaths rather than the wider community deaths that we're hearing about, deaths in care homes, and trying to fit that into the projection of this epidemic is still actually quite difficult at the moment. When we look at those countries that have been particularly rigorous, Germany and Austria, they have seen the most clearest and steepest declines in both deaths and cases across Europe. And one country that, one of the really bizarre things about this epidemic is seeing reports on television about right-wing, gun-toting, pro-Trump protesters in the United States with signs arguing in favor of Sweden. If you look at the death curve in Sweden, it has been increasing at a fairly constant rate for to date. There was a little dip in cases about a week or so ago, which might have been associated with the Easter break, and there's possibly a small dip now. But Sweden is continuing to have a fairly steep increase in its deaths week on week, and there is as yet no sign that that will be leveling out. Now, I do agree, and I think Dr. Mubarak made a number of really valid points about the disease and the validity of this issue globally. I think when you look at the epidemiology at the moment, it is noticeable that most countries in Africa have seen cases, but they haven't really experienced the severity of the epidemic that we have. Part of that might be because of poor availability of testing, but possibly as well because of the infection not being quite as transmissible in these countries, and also because of age differences. So yes, lockdowns aren't appropriate in all countries by a long way. The other thing I would just caution about is retrospectively saying that, well, actually it wasn't as big a deal as we were told, because actually virtually every country has implemented control measures. So of course it's not going to be as bad as we were told, because every country, including, albeit belatedly, the UK, has implemented fairly strict control measures. So are we now at a point of saying that this is, should we now actually be debating this, that whether or not these are appropriate, but rather should we not now be debating about how we get out of our current situation? And I think that is something that we really need to be doing. I personally, although I think the current lockdown was inevitable and appropriate, I think it's unsustainable for a very long time. And we really, really need to be thinking about how we're going to get out of this very soon. I think in doing that, we need to actually be looking a lot closer at what our neighbours in Europe are doing. And I know it has been repeated many times by our government about, well, you can't compare the UK with other countries. But I think actually you can, as long as you are careful about looking for different factors associated that might influence and bias your results. And I think we have to actually be working more closely with our European colleagues to see what is happening, to see how what they're doing, how they're relaxing is impacting on the trajectory of the pandemic in their countries. Regarding whether or not ultimately it will be shown to have been an appropriate intervention or not, I think we may never really fully answer that question, in part because we will never with absolute certainty know what would have happened if we had not done anything. And I think that is the issue for me, is if we hadn't done anything, and what would have happened to society, to the health service. And we talk about the adverse effects of the lockdown on general health. Yes, but if the health service collapses, that would also directly impact on a lot of other non-COVID related diseases. So with that, I would ask the members of your society to vote in favour of the proposition. But I would caution them as well to try and think towards the future. People, both government, outside of government, experts and non-experts, need to, at this stage, be entering into the debate and into the discussions about how our society is going to recover from this, how our universities are going to continue and to thrive post-COVID-19. Certainly many universities are going to have real financial difficulties in the coming years. And I think as well, we need to think about how as a society we can make sure that when and if something like this happens again, we are not forced into making the very difficult and very burdensome decisions that we have had to make to manage COVID-19. And with that, I will say thank you again, Adam.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hunter, for that wonderful speech. So we have one more speaker left, last but not least, Dr. Anders Tegnell, who is Sweden's state epidemiologist, and he leads the advice for the government there in response to the coronavirus pandemic. Dr. Tegnell?
Thank you very much for inviting me to this very nice event. I don't think we have anything similar in Sweden, so I feel slightly out of place, but I do my best. I don't need to repeat what many of us have said already, that this is a very unusual event and that we don't fully understand it at this stage. And it's very difficult then to sort of see how do we balance public health needs and measures with the economic needs and measures that we also need to think about. Because this situation is very new to all of us, and but there is different ways of handling it. And instead of the total lockdown that's been taking place in many countries, in Sweden we have chosen a slightly different path. And I would just like to share some experience from that and clearly show you, as Dr. Mubarak already said, that there is alternatives to closing down completely. First of all, I think we need to remember that this disease is here to stay. It can't be compared to SARS, because SARS was possible to get rid of. This disease will be here and around, and we need to find a way to live with it. And we can't just push that in front of us, and the total lockdown was most likely just push it ahead of us. So we need to find a way to live with it. So our strategy is not really to stop all transmission, but to get transmission down on a level where our healthcare and our society can keep on coping with it. And I think that's very similar to what many countries have been doing. And to do that, I mean, the main way is really social distancing in one way or the other. You can do it by total lockdown, and you can also do it in other ways. Because by doing that, you will flatten the curve. You will have a longer time to live with it, but you will also have a time when your healthcare system can keep on functioning, and the society can also stay in a functioning manner. So we have implemented a number of social distancing measures, not complete lockdowns, but we have instead looked at different situations and tried to figure out what can we do in this specific situation to minimize the spread of the disease in that situation. And we have done that by a combination of voluntary advice and regulations to the public. And the basis of this is really the way we usually work with communicable diseases in Sweden, because our laws in that area puts very much of the responsibility on the individual. The individual has a great responsibility to keep from spreading the disease to others, and that's what the law states very, very clearly, and that's then also where we've been working with very much. And this has built a great trust between the public and the agencies and the state. And just as one example, we have a voluntary vaccination program. We have had that for decades. We reach a level of 98% of all children being vaccinated without having any legal measures in place, just by building trust and confidence between the population and the state and the healthcare system. So we have done some binding regulations, and just to give you a few examples, how we have not sort of said complete lockdown, but instead we have said, okay, these are the areas we really need to work on because we know that these are dangerous. So we banned all visits to all people's homes because we know that these people are very vulnerable and we need to protect them very much. We have also told high schools and universities that they should have all the teaching done on a distance learning pattern. That works very well in those ages, and it minimized travel in Sweden quite a lot because the students, both to high schools and universities in Sweden, tend to travel fairly long distances. We have also banned mass gatherings, first to 500 people and then to 50 people. And even gatherings with smaller groups of people, we have issued a number of guidance to minimize the risk of spreads in those kind of gatherings. We also then communicated a number of voluntary recommendations. We have told people above the age of 70 to stay at home. They can go out and walk around, but they should minimize their social contacts as much as possible. And this has been made possible by a lot of help from friends, relatives, and also the communities in the way of shopping and other things. So that has worked reasonably well. We have told the whole population, if you feel the least bit sick in the morning, stay home for the whole day and stay home for a few more days after you get well, so that you won't infect anybody else in your surroundings. And we have also, of course, told people about hand washing, minimize travel and all of those kind of things. We have done this in a close collaboration with our regional medical officers and with universities, and also very much with the government. The government and the agencies in Sweden has a several hundred years tradition of working very closely together. So this has been a joint effort by the government and by the agencies. So, and we, of course, like everybody else, we follow what's published in the scientific literature. We have a really good system for collecting data in Sweden. We have personal identifiers, so we can really follow each person very well, which means that we have a very good control of our death toll. It's probably one of the best in the world because we can, by following every person who has ever had the diagnosis of COVID-19, we can follow them for 30 days and see if they end up in our death registers, and that by that we have a very close control over that. We have given our healthcare system some projections on what they should be able to meet, especially when it comes to intensive care beds and also other hospital beds, so that they started building up the needs for it very early on, so we could meet the needs. And we have followed the effect of the social distancing in different ways that I will come back to. So what has this led to? How did these non-lockdown measures work out? We have a fairly high death toll, I admit, even if I don't agree that it's increasing, and we have had a fairly flat level of that, and our cases have been stable for the last 2 to 3 weeks. We have had an RE around 1, slightly over, but not much over. When it comes to our healthcare system, it has been working rather well. We have had all the time, we have at least 20% of the intensive care beds have been empty, in spite of us having slightly more than 1,000 or 1,200 people admitted into intensive care so far. A number of them have already been released, but so the intensive care units have been working very well. We have done some modeling based on our own data, and it's according to that modeling, we reached a peak of transmission a couple of weeks ago when some 70,000 people in the Stockholm area probably got infected. And we believe that some 25% of the population have had the disease by the 1st of May. This is in the Stockholm area. We have to realize that this epidemic is very different in different parts of Sweden. In the south of Sweden, we have had very, very few cases, in spite of it being very close to Denmark, where there's a lot of cases. So the disease in general keeps on surprising us, I would say. We can also measure how people have followed different kind of distancing measures, and those reviews have proven very favorable. A lot of people stop traveling, a lot of people follow our advice, and we have a high level of trust from the community. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much as well, Dr. Tegnell. And thank you to all our speakers for joining us. I know you're all very busy people. Apparently there's a pandemic on, so experts on pandemics are valuable right now. So thank you to you all. Thank you to Patrick for helping manage the live stream. And thank you to all of you for tuning in. I know you're at home, but something to do. This week, we have some more events coming up. So we have US presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke coming on Monday evening. We have a panel on how kind of we're all reacting as a species to the pandemic spiritually and morally with Rowan Williams and others next Thursday evening. And right now on this stream, we'll have a pub quiz immediately after this. So please join us for that. And for all the information, just subscribe to our YouTube channel. And I hope you all have a wonderful day, evening. Wash your hands, stay safe. Thank you.
Oh, I better switch off the. Hello, everybody.
Sam, hello everyone. Andrew, Social Events Officer at the Union, and this is our bar manager, Sam. We're going to give you a nice little pub quiz and finish things off.
Okay, guys. So the general one of the questions, we go through them all, and at the end of all of it, we then go and put the questions onto our bar's Facebook page. So if you're not a member of the bar's Facebook, that's cool. So just go into there, and then all of the questions will be on there. So if you miss any, please don't worry. Okay, so it breaks into sections. And the first one is a special section on the Brooklyn Nine-Nine. So we're eyes down, look in. Question 1 of round 1, Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Star Andy Samberg is part of which comedy trio? So that's question 1 of Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Star Andy Samberg is part of which comedy trio? So question 1 of round 1. Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Star Andy Samberg is part of which comedy trio? About to read the answer then. Question number 2 of round 1, Brooklyn Nine-Nine. So that's question 2. What film is lead character Jake Peralta obsessed with? So that's question 2 of round 1 on Brooklyn Nine-Nine. What film is lead character Jake Peralta obsessed with? So just another quick note as well. If you send all the answers through, if you write them down on a piece of paper or on a Word document, you send it through to the BARS account or the Cambridge Union account, we'll mark them for you as well. Because there is a prize, which I'll go for the next round. So question 3 of round 1. What network picks up the series after it was dropped in series 5? So that's question 3 of round 1. What network was picked up the series after it was dropped in series 5? Okay, just to quickly go over the prize as well. We've got the lovely people of Cambridge Dry G&Ts have given us a bottle of their ready-made tonic, which is delicious if you haven't tried it yet. So that's very kind of them. So it's Cambridge Dry supplying the prizes. But obviously these prizes will be picked up once we're back open again, which will hopefully be sooner rather than later, once we're all in the clear. Okay, round 2, which is on state capitals in America. Question 1. What is the state capital of Washington? Washington State. What is the state capital of Washington State? Question 1. So question 1 of round 2, state capitals. Question 1, what is the state capital of Washington? Question number 2. What is the state capital of Mississippi? So question number 2 of state capitals. What is the state capital of Mississippi? Question 2 of state capitals. What is the state capital of Mississippi? Question number 3 of state capitals. What is the capital of Hawaii? So question number 3 of state capitals. What is the capital of Hawaii? Forgot to talk then. Question number 3, what is the state capital of Hawaii? Next up, question 4 of state capitals. What is the official state nickname of Texas? So that's question 4 of state capitals. What is the official state nickname of Texas? Jubbly. So they go into some categories rounds before we go into the general knowledge round. So if there's a few ones you don't know, don't worry, there'll be a general knowledge soon. That's all for our lovely Cambridge Dry ready mix gin and tonic, which is really good. Okay, the James Bond round. Question number 1. Which 2 Bond films featured Robbie Coltrane as Valentin Zukovsky? So question 1 of James Bond. Which 2 Bond films featured Robbie Coltrane as Valentin Zukovsky? And one more time, James Bond, question 1. Which 2 Bond films featured Robbie Coltrane as Valentin Zukovsky? Question number 2, James Bond. How many actors have played M in the official James Bond series? So that's all the ones produced by Eon Productions. So question 2 of James Bond. How many actors have played M in the official James Bond series? So the ones produced by Eon Productions. Okie dokie. Question number 3 of James Bond round. What was the first Bond film not to take its title from an Ian Fleming short story or novel? It's question 3. What was the first Bond film not to take its title from an Ian Fleming short story or novel? Got a license to kill. Next up, London Bridges. London Bridges, question 1. Question 1 of London Bridges. William Wordsworth wrote a famous poem about the view seen from which London bridge? So question 1 of London Bridges. William Wordsworth wrote a famous poem about the view seen from which London bridge? Question number 2 of London Bridges. On its opening, what bridge was nicknamed Wobbly Bridge? Question number 2 of London Bridges. On its opening, what bridge was nicknamed Wobbly Bridge? Question number 2 of London Bridges. What, on its opening, what was the nickname given to Wobbly Bridge? We all caught up? Lovely. Question number 3. The song Misty Morning, Albert Bridge was recorded by which group? Question number 3 of London Bridges. The song Misty Morning, Albert Bridge was recorded by which group? Question number 3 of London Bridges. The song Misty Morning, Albert Bridge was recorded by which group? Question number 4, one I expect everyone to get. The annual university boat race starts at which Thames Bridge? So that's question 4 of London Bridges. The annual university boat race starts at which Thames Bridge? Which Thames Bridge, yeah. So the annual university boat race starts at which Thames Bridge? Lovely jubbly. Okay, so with the next round, it's the Netflix round. I'm going to do the description of Netflix TV series, and you have to name it just from the description. So the description 1 from Netflix. After his business partner cheats on a dangerous client, financial advisor Marty must devise a radical plan to save the lives of himself and his family. So that's description number 1 of Netflix. After his business partner cheats a dangerous client, the financial advisor Marty must devise a radical plan to save the lives of himself and his family. Got light now behind me as well, that guys. So description number 1 of Netflix. After his business partner cheats on a dangerous client, financial advisor Marty must devise a radical plan to save his lives of himself and his family. Question number 2 of the descriptions round from Netflix. A twisted criminal's gruesome videos drive a group of amateur online sleuths to launch a risky manhunt that pulls them into the dark underworld. So that's description number 2 of Netflix descriptions. A twisted criminal's gruesome videos drive amateur online sleuths to launch a risky manhunt that pulls them into a dark underworld. Okay, one more time. Description number 2. A twisted criminal's gruesome videos drive a group of amateur online sleuths to launch a risky manhunt that pulls them into a dark underworld. Description number 3 of Netflix. When a young boy vanishes, a small town uncovers a mystery involving secret experiments, terrifying supernatural forces, and one strange little girl. So that's description number 3 of Netflix. You have to tell me what it is. When a young boy vanishes, a small town uncovers a mystery involving secret experiments, terrifying and unnatural forces, and one strange little girl. Okay, this is the last of the specific rounds. Then we go into the general knowledge. Music round. Adam Richard Wiles' debut studio album, I Created Disco, was released in June 2007. How is he known professionally? So that's music. Question 1. Adam Richard Wiles' debut studio album, I Created Disco, was released in June 2007. How is he professionally known? Question 2 of music round. The most expensive paparazzi photo ever sold was of which bald pop star? Question number 2 of the music round. The most expensive paparazzi photo ever was of which bald pop star? Question number 3 of music. Which rock band has Kelly Jones on the lead vocals? So question number 3 of music. Which rock band has Kelly Jones on the lead vocals? One more time, I'm sure you'll know. Which rock band has Kelly Jones on the lead vocals? Okay, we're now on to our general knowledge rounds. So we'll go through these and then there's a drawing round as well. General knowledge, question 1. What city was Boris Johnson born in? So that's question 1 of general knowledge. What city was Boris Johnson born in? Question number 1. What city was Boris Johnson born in? Question number 2. Who is the current WBA heavyweight boxing champion of the world? So question number 2 of general knowledge. Who is the current WBA heavyweight boxing champion of the world? Question number 2. Who is the current WBA heavyweight boxing champion of the world? who is the current WBA heavyweight boxing champion of the world? Question number 3. What year did Alec Guinness die? Actor Alex Guinness die. What year did actor Alex Guinness dies? Dies? What year did actor Alec Guinness die? Obi-Wan Kenobi. Question number 4 of the general knowledge round. Spider-Man debuted in comics in what year? So question number 4. Spider-Man debuted in comics in what year? Question number 5. William Shakespeare died on his birthday, but what date was it? Question number 5. William Shakespeare died on his birthday, but what date was it? Question number 5. William Shakespeare died on his birthday, but what date was it? Question number 6. Arnold Schwarzenegger was the governor of which state? Question number 6. Arnold Schwarzenegger was the governor of which state? People here know. Question number 6. Arnold Schwarzenegger was the governor of which state? Question number 7. Which fictional beer is Homer Simpson's tipple of choice? Question number 7. Which fictional beer is Homer Simpson's tipple of choice? Question number 7. Which fictional beer is Homer Simpson's tipple of choice? Question number 8. What famous race meeting takes place on the Isle of Man? So, question number 8 of general knowledge. Which famous race meeting takes place on the Isle of Man? Question number 8. Which famous race meeting takes place on the Isle of Man? Question number 9. What gas were used in which gas was used in British World War II barrage balloons? So, question number 9. Which gas was used to fill the barrage balloons in World War II? So I've said it differently every time. Let's try it a different way the other way. Question number 9. What gas were used? What gas were British World War II barrage balloons filled with? There we go. What gas were British World War II barrage balloons filled with? Question number 9 of general knowledge. Question number 10. Who was the USA ambassador to Czechoslovakia between 1989 and 1992? Who was the USA ambassador to Czechoslovakia between 1989 and 1992? One more time. Who was the USA ambassador to Czechoslovakia between 1989 and 1992? Question number 11. How many Emirates make up the UAE, United Arab Emirates? So that's question number 11. How many Emirates make up the United Arab Emirates? Question number 11. How many Emirates make up the UAE? Okay, question number 12. What was the name given to the Samurai Code of Honor? Question number 12. What was the name given to the Samurai Code of Honor? Question number 12. What was the name given to the Samurai Code of Honor? Question number 12 of general knowledge. What was the name given to the Samurai Code of Honor? Question number 13. How many wings does a bee have? Question number 13. How many wings does a bee have? Question number 13. How many wings does a bee have? Question number 14. Who lit the flames in the 1996 Olympics in Atlanta? So who lit the flame in the 1996 Olympics at Atlanta? Question number 14. Question number 14. Who lit the flames in the 1996 Atlanta Olympic Games? Question number 15. What was the first human invention to break the sound barrier? Question number 15. What was the first human invention to break the sound barrier? Question number 15. What was the first human invention to break the sound barrier? Question number 16. What club did David Beckham make his Football League debut for? So question number 16. What club did David Beckham make his Football League debut for? Question number 16. What club did David Beckham make his Football League debut for? Question number 18. What is the more common name for the medical condition peribital hematoma? Question number 18. Oh, I'll skip to question, haven't I? We'll go back. Question number 18. What was the more common name for the medical condition of peribital hematoma? It's going back one. No, question number 17. In Gulliver's Travels, what was the name given to the flying islands? Question number 17. In Gulliver's Travels, what was the name given to the flying islands? So question number 17. In Gulliver's Travels, what was the name given to the flying islands? Question number 17. In Gulliver's Travels, what was the name given to the flying islands? Back to question number 18 again, just so we're clear. What was the more common name for the medical condition peribital hematoma? What is the more common name for the medical condition of peribital hematoma? Question number 19 of general knowledge. What was the first colour film to win Best Picture Oscar? Question number 19. What was the first colour film to win Best Picture Oscar? Question number 19. What was the first colour film to win Best Picture Oscar? So on the home straight now. Question number 20. What address does Sherlock Holmes live at? Question number 20. What address does Sherlock Holmes live at? Question number 20. What address does Sherlock Holmes live at? Question number 21. Why are Cardiff the only Welsh football team to have triangular corner flags? Question number 21. Why are Cardiff the only Welsh football team to have triangular corner flags? Question number 21. Why are Cardiff the only Welsh football team to have triangular corner flags? Question number 22. Theresa May is a member of parliament for which large town? That's question number 22. Theresa May is a member of parliament for which large town? Question number 22. Theresa May is a member of parliament for which large town? Question number 23. In 1963, what city was Robert Kennedy assassinated? In 1963, what city was Robert Kennedy assassinated? In 1963, what city was Robert Kennedy assassinated? Question number 24. The American Republic Party is commonly referred to as the GOP, but what does that stand for? Question number 24. The American Republic Party is commonly referred to as the GOP, but what does that stand for? One more time. Question number 24 of general knowledge. The American Republic Party is commonly referred to as the GOP. What does that stand for? Question number 25 of general knowledge. What is the name of Super Mario's brother? Question number 25 of general knowledge. What is the name of Super Mario's brother? And one more time. What is the name of Super Mario's brother? Okay, so we now move on to drawing a picture round. If you could send over the answers that you've done, either via Word document, or you can have, if you've written it down, you can screenshot it and send it to us. Send it to the BARS Facebook account. So all of the questions are now going to be put onto the BARS Facebook account. So if you've missed any, you can go back and have a look at them. Remember, this is a prize. So the prize is going to be a bottle of the Ready Serve Cambridge Gin and Tonic, which is absolutely delicious. So if you haven't tried it, you definitely should. And they'll be picked up once we open back up again. This with the last round is to draw me a picture. If you can send me your best picture of documentary guy, Louis Theroux, please. So your best picture of Louis Theroux. So the last part of the round is draw me a picture of Louis Theroux. Now you can do that on your computer, or you can draw it, or however you think is the best way. Okay, guys, I think we have everything there now. So thank you very much. Stay safe, and I'll see you all soon. Bye-bye.
Yep. Thanks for coming, guys. Submit your answers to where Sam wanted, and that's coming along. We'll see you next week or whenever the next debate is.